Hey everyone, so at Impedance 2025, I'm at Hyte's office right now. If we can get a quick pan, this is the real office. There are people, oh, they're ducking behind the tables. There are people working here. So anyway, we're gonna be talking about the X50 cases today. These are pretty interesting. They are very strange externally, but in mostly good ways. So we'll talk through that. And I also have Rob Teller here. We're gonna be going over the panels that Mike is holding. So these are some early, I guess, tooling samples?
Those panels are from last week when the factory was about to give up.
And then they ended up making the panels on here.
In the 11th hour, we had a miracle front panel baby that was good enough to show you today.
Excellent. So we get some extra behind the scenes on some of the challenges. So this type of case, from what I understand, is not particularly easy to make, mostly from, well, we'll go over it today, but looking at some of the corners, like up here on this front panel, where the perforations continue around the edge, but maintaining some structural rigidity. And then also on the back, there's these louvered vents, which require a 3-step process to manufacture. And so we're getting some of this extra information because Rob is here. Rob, you may recognize from the tariffs video, talking about some of the processes and how Hyte was dealing with that situation. So these are the cases we're going through. They are $120 or $150 for the expected price. The US price may be a little bit different, but otherwise, we'll be reviewing them soon enough, so let's get into the details. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermalright and the Frozen Prism 360 liquid cooler. Thermalright's Frozen Prism is one of the most affordable liquid coolers on the market and is able to achieve competitive results with a high cold plate convexity that applies pressure centrally to the silicon area based on our testing. This works on both AMD and Intel. We previously benchmarked the Frozen Prism and found that it's overall competitive for its price point. The cooler comes in a few color variations. It has a blackout option and an RGB option, and it's the cheapest liquid cooler we've tested anytime recently that still hits performance markers. Learn more at the link in the description below. All right, so for the X50, there are a lot of different colors, but the stuff that jumps out at me the most is really just the panels, where this is a gigantic piece of perforated metal. And actually most of this case is steel. So one of the things that Hyte pointed out to me pretty quickly was that this is also steel, even though it looks, depending on the camera angle, the lighting, it looks plastic, but so that's steel, pretty much everything is. There's a plastic tray down here, there's a few other bits and pieces for sort of making the curves in the mold and things like that. But otherwise, it is pretty much an entirely metal case, no included fans. The focus, it seems like, has been on just trying to make something that looks different, but for Hyte, what's different this time from the Y60, the Y70, is they are going for performance. So obviously BYO fans, but there are 3 120 slots in the bottom down here. And this, actually, let's just pull the filter. So that filter pulls, the 3 120s sit there. Hyte has its own fans that color match most of the models. It sounds like there's not gonna be a red, and that I'll just point out too, that red is gonna end up being matte, not the gloss. That's a pre-production sample. For the rest of the fan slots, side panel here has side intake options, and then there's also front intake mounts. So it is heavily ventilated everywhere. And one of the more interesting things that jumped out to me was, so this front panel, because of the side punctures here, one of the things we've talked about in the past, especially with Cooler Master cases, is a lot of times the companies will pop out these front panels, but then they end up blocking in the sides. And so depending on how far the fans sit into that panel, you can end up not benefiting from the side at all. It can really restrict access to air. So we talked about this originally with the H500P, I think, most heavily before they totally overhauled it. So anyway, pretty interesting, especially when you look at stamping detail in the corners and the way it's all shaped. And we're going to talk about some of the manufacturing a little later in the video. But for other case features, so on the back here, one of the things that's not final for the cheaper $120 model, which has the mesh panel rather than glass, is the presence of the grommets. So apparently the grommets are, Rob, I'll let you jump in. Do you want to give a rough, like, how much are grommets?
Yeah, so the grommets are actually the most expensive part per volume of a case. Silicone plus the thickness of the silicone plus the tight tolerances and the aesthetic design and the functional design really adds up in being very expensive. So each grommet of any case, not just our special grommets, are several dollars of unit cost. And so once you margin that up, that's when you actually start to move
Right.
and the price jumps. And so we're going to see if that's the thing that we can control the costs enough and include it in the non-glass version.
Right.
But ultimately, if you don't have the glass, you're really not even seeing inside of the case. Nothing in terms of the function is changing whether you have the grommet or not. They're just a really nice luxury item.
Right. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like this is the type of detail that we don't typically get, and Hyte was unique in sharing that in the terrace video as well. But gives some better perspective, I guess, for where the decisions come for cost cutting on things. But anyway, it's very deep cable management channel. Drive support on the sides, and then I think one of the other things I wanted to point out was on the glass panel. So the glass is 4 millimeters thick, which is gigantic, and it is, as I'm told, a laminated acoustic glass. These are they're a little sort of deceptive on the camera, but they are straight or mostly straight, and basically. Hyte is trying to do this for two reasons. One is mechanical or structural. The other one is flow. And so the point specifically brought up to us during the discussions about what the product's trying to achieve is commonly we talk about impedance to flow in, but impedance to flow out doesn't come up as much. There were a couple case reviews where we brought up specifically, I think the Landcool 207 was one of them, where it has a really restricted outflow in one of the panels, and they even put a dust filter on it, things like that. But in theory, being able to help the air exit faster, more efficiently, should help the thermal performance. So Hyte is going for a thermal performance chart topper, I guess. We'll see how it does in our testing. And the fan choices are going to be what we need to figure out in our review. But I think that covers most of the basics I wanted to get into. There's a few other small details. So for example, up here, front I/O ends up routing basically internally and then kicking out over here. So these cables end up coming out on the side. There's a couple of cable management, Velcro straps, things like that. So some of the more standard features. And then finally for the louvered vents. So they continue this to the PCIe slot, and this actually ends up, I think, strengthening the metal compared to what you might typically see. So what is this from a Y70? Y70. So that's from a Y70. I mean, the reasoning is pretty obvious. You think of like the Frame 4000D or something where they're punching the front panel in, so you get that additional effective thickness or depth.
If you actually weigh them,
yeah.
The louvered vented version is significantly heavier because it retains nearly all the metal from the original steel.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and while the regular style has been stamped out, so you've lost a significant volume of metal.
Subtractive process versus punching there.
Yeah, this is like manipulating the material that's there, and that's reducing the material.
So, and I think this is probably a good point to, that's kind of all the basics I really wanted to go through. They have a bunch of different colors. You can see them on the tables here. But that's the case. So $120, $150 for the targets. Rob, let's go through some of the more unique details. So manufacturing,
it's awful. It's a terrible, terrible business. I don't recommend anyone get into it. And if you do, don't try to make anything new or creative because it's painful.
Is it soul crushing?
Yeah. The only good part about it is that I get to stand here with you and show it to you. So round things are just typically difficult to make, and then they're very difficult to make out of steel. And then if you have compound curves, so a compound curve is when you have curves in two directions. So if we just rolled it this way, but the sides were like flat and you had a sharp edge, that would be one curve. But because we roll it two different directions, this corner is a compound curve.
How is this made, that corner?
So this is basically stamped with a 3-ton press. We use hydraulic presses, and so that means that when the machine comes down, it comes down very slow and smoothly. Most case tooling, they use a 1-ton press, and it comes down very quick, right? Your yield goes to contributing to your cost. So the fact that this is using a bigger press and it has to come down slowly means our yield is lower, and the cost and complexity of getting this right is more difficult.
Is there higher machine time costs?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's factored in.
I mean, just the sheer amount of how many could you produce in a day is dramatically reduced when you run the machine at, say,
Why does it have to
10
run
seconds.
slowly?
If you go too quickly, things will tear and rip. And so you have to kind of gently massage the metal into its position, where if the machine just sort of like came down, it'd be like a guillotine and just like cut it in half, kind of like the panels over there.
Okay.
And so the process to figure this out too, we experimented with using like heated up presses, which is, very, very expensive. We experimented with stainless steel. We've experimented with steel that doesn't have any nickel or chromium in it, and that reduces the structural rigidity, making it softer so you can manipulate it more, but then it oxidizes immediately, which is like that panel that Mike held up. And so the fact that we got to this, like literally on Monday, this one was made. And if you look at the panels...
For context, for people watching, it's Friday. The same week, so...
And so if you look at the panels over here, these were actually made by a different process where they punched out these holes by laser, and this is not manufacturable. Like this design, if you told me to bring this to market, is actually not manufacturable at all. And this one was made through a mass production process. So that's the breakthrough.
Because these front panels, they don't perforate all the way to the edges. So is that pre-production stuff?
Yeah, so this was our original design. And our thinking was if you had less mesh, it would actually be easier. And what we ended up finding out from the factory was the way the mesh stops is like right on the apex of the curve. And that makes it a terrible place to have a lot of metal and then less metal.
Got it.
And so the factory was like, can you have more mesh? And we're like, absolutely. Can you give us more mesh? And it's just a beautiful, happy coincidence that we got on the 11th hour.
What else was hard with this?
Similarly, this is a deep draw stamp on the power supply shroud. It being metal, and it's not actually like folded over pieces of metal. This is another slow, deep draw stamping using a very high
deep draw, meaning
press.
that same slow type.
Yeah. So typically, when you stamp metal, especially with curves, you have a limited amount of like depth to it. But these techniques are used for a lot of kitchen products like colanders and metal bowls and such as that. And those are very specialized machines, and they have to run slow, and they have very tight tolerances to achieve those.
Any challenges with the louvered slats in the back?
Yeah, the louvered slats are actually a dream that I've had since I worked at NZXT. So going back
when was that?
13 years ago, this is something I've asked to be in a case, almost every case that I've made. And the response from the factory is pretty much the same. We can't do that, or we don't know how to do that, or it's too expensive to do. It becomes one of those things that people just sort of brush off. And I'm not a manufacturing expert, so I can't go and challenge the manufacturer. But what this is, the result of this actually being made is because the factory that we work with in China, who's made our Y70 and the Y60, they have an appreciation for doing difficult things. They have come to understand that if they do the difficult thing, that yields more units. And that yields more money for them. And so those relationships are what take these like crazy ideas and go from them saying, no, we're not going to do that, that's impossible, to like, let's try it. And they did it, and it's an incredible breakthrough, and I'm so proud.
Let's check out some of the messed up panels as well. So what's the backstory for these first?
So we've created easily 100 tested panels, and we're testing all these different dynamics, different materials, different processes, different temperatures. It goes on and on, because until you know how to make it, you don't know what's going to be that secret ingredient that allows you to make it. So you try everything. And we've been experimenting for the last 5 months on trying to get these panels made. And so, this is our final design. It will continue to get improved and straightened as we work out the manufacturing. But you can easily see that we had a lot of losers in here. And when someone tells you it's impossible, I'm the kind of person who's like, shut the fuck up. Like, what does that actually mean? But when they fly me to China and they show me a table's worth of samples that we have spent tens of thousands of dollars to make like each one of these, because they each need their own tooling to change the thing and experiment, you really start to come to terms like, maybe I pushed this a little too far.
Maybe it is, at least within cost, impossible.
And that was the scary thing, is I said, well, what if we do this, or what if we do that? And the response 2 weeks ago was, at any price, we cannot make this for you. And that's a real scary situation.
So why? I mean, using these, I guess, like why? This is plastic.
So this is plastic, and obviously we could have made it in plastic. We would have been done. We pack it up, and you go home, and then I'd hand it to you, and you'd be like, oh, it feels a little flimsy, and I can't make it out of metal. Well, fuck that. We're gonna make it out of metal. So this one, you can see it's all rusted. This is because we're using a softer metal, and that means that there's less nickel and chromium in it. And so nickel and chromium give it that rigidity, and that's the thing that would typically cause it to rip. So you can see this didn't actually rip, but it didn't form the way we wanted to.
So they reduced the nickel and chromium to reduce the chance of it tearing.
Tearing, yeah.
But then it also introduces oxidation.
Really quickly.
Okay.
This panel, I know it looks like it's 1,000 years old. I believe it's about a week and a half old.
Holy crap. Okay.
And it just rusts.
Yeah.
And you can see why we did that. If you look at these other ones, they just tear. They tear right at the seam of where we have a lot of metal and we have less metal, and it's right on that compound curve.
But this one did not really tear, so I guess it's just got all the other downsides.
Yeah, and so then it becomes a question of like, do we need to keep pursuing this, or do we need to change the design, or do we change the machine,
right,
or we change the material?
So that ripped, but it fixed the oxidation issue.
Yeah.
What's the deal here?
This one, they actually stamped it, and then they tried to weld it together.
Oh, interesting.
And so this was just not going to be acceptable. There's no way that they're going to be able to control that to make it as round as we really wanted it. Like there's 50 ways to skin a cat, but only one where that cat looks presentable at Computex, and we didn't find that until the last minute.
What about the other two down, or the other three, I guess?
Yeah, there's also some.
There's another ripped one.
Yeah, this one ripped heavily.
And is rusted.
And you can, if you look closely, you'll see that there's a difference in the hole size and the hole spacing. Those are other considerations. When you increase the porosity, there's just less metal, and it's going to get closer and closer to tearing. So this.
Well, I mean, there's a question too: is where were you marking the end of an acceptable trade-off for porosity? You know, like how do you come to? Because I guess
it's a great question, and I can tell you that this was part of the frustrating experience here, where our factory, they were just trying, and it's not like I'm working with them and communicating every single day of what they're going to try. They try a lot of things without me knowing it. Here you could see that they tried to use a lower porosity mesh on the edges.
Right.
I would have never approved this. And when they showed this to me thinking that, we achieved something here, I'm like, guys, this is not acceptable.
Right.
But at one point they said this was all that they could do. And to me,
this is also, as a reviewer, this is the first thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So.
No, we've known each other for a very long time. I've got a little Steve Burke inside of me that's telling me what's not acceptable at all times. Yeah. But our goal was to have 40+% porosity.
Okay.
I think our final design ended up being about 45% porosity. Yeah. It's a 2 millimeter hole with 3 millimeter spacing. After painting, that changes a little bit.
Okay.
But
the last two.
Yeah, this is just another one, super ripped up. And this is a different process entirely.
So that seems close to what you wanted.
But it has other issues where this is actually a stamped sheet of mesh, rather than being like a piece of steel that they stamped some mesh out of and they formed.
So it starts as mesh.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is entirely mesh, and that actually means that I can't mount any mounting points on it. Like they made the thing. Yeah. I can't attach it to a case. They can't actually control the tolerances very well.
You would basically have to find a spot to put some plastic or something in.
Weld it, or it's so
run screws through.
So you see this and you're like, oh, we got close, but actually to a front panel, that's not it. And so when you look at the final front panel, there's about 40 millimeters of depth of mesh, and that's stamped into the piece of steel that was a solid piece at one point. And then we fold the remaining solid piece, and then we put these studs in here, and those studs clip into the clips.
Cool. Very cool. The last thing, I guess I'll throw this in there. We might talk about this separately, but America or no?
No, this is made in China.
No, I mean shipping too.
We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see.
So pricing for the U.S.?
We're still working on the final costs, and if we can get our costs controlled enough, I would like to ship it to America at $150. And also, I mean, May 31st, Section 301 tariff, the break might expire. Yeah. And if that does, I mean, all of our prices are going to change again. So there's a lot of uncertainty with that.
We'll possibly talk about this more in a separate video or something. I'm still trying to figure it out. But just to quickly throw it out there, there have been changes to the tariffs in the last week or so. But like the exemptions, not exemptions previously that we talked about, is not as simple. They are not all paused. So there are still tariffs. We've seen a lot of confusion about this, where some of the big number general tariffs are paused.
And to be clear, even ones that are paused, they're not zero.
Yeah.
They're still double-digit percentages.
Yeah, and so yeah, conversation for another time, but it's still there's still a lot of them that are in place. There's like 25%. There's another 20. Well, there's 20% now. There's another 25 that might come in. There's the steel and aluminum.
Aluminum, yeah.
And then the section whatever it was, May 31st expiry. So anyway, so we'll talk about that more separately. But Rob, thank you for joining me. Sure. We'll avoid the tetanus liability. And, subscribe for more as always. We'll have a ton of stuff at Computex. This year, actually, we have a lot of different meetings with people who've worked on the product to give us some more behind-the-scenes information on it. So that should be fun. Check back for that. Go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. And we'll see you all next time.